Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for today, giving us the opportunity to speak to you how we think we can build the infrastructure that Africa requires in the future. We are proudly a Eswatini company. We, however, work in different other SADC countries like Mozambique, Zambia, South Africa, Botswana, Namibia, and we've even been up to Uganda as well. We basically build roads, any kinds of roads, water and sewer lines, as well as all kinds of housing projects, industrial and commercial buildings. So the question today that I want to ask you is that why do we always speak about the increase in infrastructure? Why is it required in Africa? Well, the World Economic Forum states that infrastructure development is widely recognized as a key and a critical enabler of all economic activities across borders as well as within borders. They further state that for every $1 spent on a capital project in Africa or all over the world, and especially in Africa, an investor can expect a return between 5 to 25% on that money. The scary thing, however, is that PwC has done a study over 2016 that currently the infrastructure expenditure required for the current demand is approximately $90 billion per annum in all over Africa. That demand, however, in 2025 is expected to double to $180 billion. As you know, every country in Africa is different. Some has got major problems like political unrest, there's terrorism, there's corruption, and most of all, there's poor infrastructure. IMF states that in 2032, the reality is that Africa will have a larger young workforce than India and China combined. In order to cater for this massive increase in the demand of the population, there will be a huge increase in the demand for infrastructure and infrastructure spending. And that doesn't only include roads, but includes housing, water, and energy. In Africa, however, as you'll see later on in my presentation, governments are only able to sponsor and fund less than 30% of the current projects. That's expected to go down to less than 20% in the next decade. But first of all, to understand what I'm talking about and to understand the future, we need to look at the current version of what is going on in Africa at the moment. Currently in Africa, in 2017, according to the Deloitte's report on infrastructure, there's 303 projects, what we call mega projects, ongoing in Africa at the moment. That was up from 286 in 2016. Like I said, those projects, mega projects, are projects that's $50 million and more. If we break it down and we go into the different sectors of Africa, if we look at North Africa, you'll see that the projects in 2013 was 22 projects valued at $6.7 billion. That increased, however, in 2016 to 42 projects at $76 billion, and then basically probably 1 or 2 projects finished, and now currently they're sitting on $77.1 billion. West Africa, however, went from 66 projects, $49 billion in 2013, to 2016, 92 projects and $119 billion. That is more than Southern Africa. And you'll see that in 2017, that went down a little bit to just below 100 billion, but it's still higher than the whole of Southern Africa. So as much as we think we got the most mega projects ongoing, we don't. The other one is Central Africa. You'll see that there was 17 projects, 15.3 billion worth in 2013. That, however, went up the projects, but in 2016, it was only worth 7 billion of all the projects ongoing. And in 2017, the projects has gone down, the value has gone up, but it's probably the sector that's getting the least mega projects actually built all over Africa. The interesting one, however, is East Africa. 93 projects in 2013, 67.7 billion. In 2016, you saw that there was 43 projects that fell to 27 billion. When we did this speech last year with the 2016 results, people were talking at the seminars about the increase in infrastructure spending in East Africa. So we had to go back and look at the data, and the data clearly showed that we were right. But what the people were talking about came out in this next one, in the 2017 results. You can see that it went up to 71 projects and 32.6 billion. So there's definitely a revival in East Africa. Coming to Southern Africa, you'll see that there's 124 projects. Obviously, South Africa's got the most mega projects of all the countries in Africa. 83.2 billion in 2013. Going up, the projects came down a little bit, but the value still went up in 2016. And then in 2017, the projects went up, the value went a little bit down, but this is 89 billion US dollars. That means that we $10 billion less mega projects than in Western Africa, for example. So now a very important question that we all need to look at is how is this project actually being funded at the moment? Because that's where our problem lies. And from the same report, you'll see that in 2016, governments were only able to fund 28.3% of all mega projects ongoing. And that's coming down. In 2017, it's already at 27%. We'll discuss this a little bit further, but that's a major problem because how are we going to be funded in the future? If we look at this and we break down the mega projects a little bit more, it gives you even a worse picture. If you look at the industries, transport from 20, so this is relating the report from 2016 to 2017. Transport projects has gone down from 33.6 to 23.3%. Real estate, housing and those kind of things went down from 22.4% to 13.8%. Over the last few days, one of the themes that came out is that we need housing, we need more housing, we need green housing in Africa. But you can see here that the expenditure is going down on housing. The next one, energy, basically stayed the same, but with the increase in population, this has to go up. Shipping has basically gone up a little bit, but a very telling one is the oil and gas sector. In 2016, value-wise, 4.5% of all projects was oil and gas related. Currently, the following year, 25% of all mega projects ongoing all over Africa is oil and gas related. And that is a significant increase that we need to look at. Mining has gone down a little bit, but the most worrying one is that of all the projects and all the things that we have to spend money on, only 1.3% in 2016, and that's gone down to 1.2%, is water related. And you'll see how critical that is, that we need to change this. We need to spend more on our water resources. Some interesting facts is the IMF states that African countries are losing up to 2% of their national GDP every single year due to poor infrastructure. Before 2015, IMF as well as the World Economic Forum predicted that Africa's growth for the next decade or two will be 5% or more. New predictions after that, however, is basically saying that we'll probably do about 3.4%, and I've just seen yesterday they've actually downgraded that to approximately 2.9%. So logic says is that if we can increase our infrastructure, we can actually get back and we can even better the predicted growth before 2015. So what is the future requirements? One of the first problems that we discussed just now is water resources. The World Economic Forum states that water is the greatest societal and economical problem and challenge we have in the world today. It's been said many times that the next world war will probably be fought over water resources. Water is overused and there is no adequate water infrastructure in most African countries. For instance, in Mozambique, we've had the experience, every year, January, February, there's massive rains, there's massive floods in the area that causes huge damage to all infrastructure, including housing and roads. Foreign investments come in, we spend the money, we fix the roads, but we don't look at the water. We don't look to store the water that's coming. And the following year, every year, when the rain comes, it washes the same infrastructure away. And we've got to go and find, they've got to go and find funding from external sources to replace the same infrastructure. If a foreign investment has to put more emphasis on purification, storage, and management facilities for water all over Africa. Otherwise, we're heading for a massive disaster. The next one is energy related. Energy demand is going to substantially increase with the explosion with the population explosion. Africa will definitely be affected by this because in most countries, our energy infrastructure is far below world standards. Even in South Africa, as you all know, a few years ago, we were still going under load shedding. This should not really happen. In Mozambique, probably 4 years ago, for a total time of approximately 4 months, the whole northern side of Mozambique had no electricity. And that was caused due to flooding that damaged some electrical poles, and they couldn't get to the electrical poles to fix it. The amount of the economic disaster to that area is you cannot actually describe it, and you can't actually tally it up. If Africa wants to join the fourth industrial revolution, we need to put the energy and the electrical infrastructure in place. Otherwise, we're just going to start carrying on, falling further and further behind the rest of the world. The next one is rising urbanization. We've spoken about that in all the forums that I've visited in the last 3 days. In 2010, Africa had 51 cities with more than 1 million residents. It's expected and predicted that in 2040, there will be more than 100 cities all over Africa with more than 1 million residents, with 7 actually having more than 10 million residents. In Kinshasa, DRC, their population is expected to grow to 24 million by 2040. In a bid, however, to cope this rising urbanization, there is new cities being built, but it's not being built fast enough, and we have to look into that, into the future. Nairobi, Kenya, there's currently a demand for more than 150,000 houses per year that has to be built, and those are new houses. Ghana currently is sitting with a 1.6 million housing deficit, and in 4 years' time, they expect that to reach almost 3.6 million housing units. The other problem that nobody really thinks about is if more people come to the cities, with the rising urbanization, if we bring more investment into Africa as more people come from overseas, there's a huge and acute shortage of quality office space as well in most of our cities, which also has to urgently be addressed. So the question then comes is, how will the non-government projects actually be funded? We know that, most of them actually is funded through direct foreign investments. Now, as most of you know, direct foreign investments are financed through institutions or other countries like China, France, Arab world, African Development Bank, and World Bank. And currently, they are approximately 40% of all mega projects in Africa is being funded through direct foreign investments. So some of the projects that we actually working in Eswatini, as you know, formerly Swaziland, there's a lot of foreign investments coming in there, and it's changing the whole economic environment in Swaziland for the better. Just to show you one or two of these examples, the first one is the construction of the access road to His Majesty King Mswati III's International Airport, basically a dual carriageway highway, 4 bridge structures. It's funded by a combination of Badia and KFAD money from Arabia and Kuwait, and approximately 83 million US dollars. The next one is the construction of the Manzini traffic circle to Batlane, lot 1 and 2, lot 1 being funded by ADB, and lot 2 through a combination of Badia, OFIT, and Abu Dhabi money, 148 million US dollars. And then also there's a international convention center being built, sponsored by Taiwan Exim Bank, to the value of 130 million US dollars. This, like I said, is changing the economical environment in Swaziland, and it can carry on in the rest of Africa. But the fact remains that governments can only fund less than 30%. Foreign investments are currently at 40%. So the question arises, how do we fund the other 30%? And keep in mind that we have to double our infrastructure spending just to keep up with the demand in the future. While our view is that the answer lies in private-public partnerships. Private-public partnerships or private companies actually have the skill and the knowledge to work with government and with public sector to actually get solutions to problems that they have and to implement these problems. The old methods of contracting, where the client sits on one side and the contractor sits on the other side, is becoming outdated. We need a different kind of thinking. And from Inyatsi's side, we call this the New Africa contract, where we can all work together to make solutions happen, or to find solutions and to make the projects happen. Now, PPPs are extremely receptive to this New Africa contract because all stakeholders have to work together to get these projects implemented. Governments can still identify and through the help of the private sector actually implement these projects. As you all know probably, PPPs can be used for many different kinds of sectors. But in order for it to emerge more in Africa, there's a few things that has to happen. One of it is that countries need to improve their business environment. It does not help that we go through the whole process only to find that there's no legislation in place for PPPs. This has to change. Governments need to realize that private sector is there to help them. There's some serious constraints. I'll just discuss that afterwards, after this slide. But then there must be a desire from governments to be able to deliver a greater and a more efficient service. If there's no desire like that in the government level, this will never happen. And very important, coupled with that, is that there must be a political will. There was a question just now at the water session where they said, why didn't Cape Town plan for the water problems? They've been warned before. But was it really politically viable? If it rains, why would a politician tell anybody to stop using water? So it must be a political will going forward. The constraints I talked about basically is the inadequate legal framework in most of the countries. There's also technical skills. We don't say as a private sector we've got all the skills, but we've got access to the skills that we can bring in to train ourselves as well as government and public sectors to be able to implement PPPs. And then very important is we need to go out and we need to show the investors the money is there. That we need to go and show the investors that their money is safe in Africa and then they can get the returns that they require. So I know my time is running out, but I just want to show you a quick example of Senegal, which is in Western Africa. Since the 1990s, they've had various legal frameworks that allow PPP-type projects. In total, from 1990, there was about 17 PPP projects being implemented to the value of 2.1 billion US dollars. So the question is, how are they able to do this? Where you sit in a situation where Ghana sits almost close to Senegal, where they aren't able to almost implement one PPP project. So the first one, like we discussed, is there was a political commitment. They realized that they want to deliver better services. They engage all the stakeholders at all times for all the projects. There was involvement during the planning phase and during the implementation phase. the government was able to show a clear and visible benefit to each and every project that they wanted to utilize the PPP project for. And then very importantly, they used the experience from the previous projects and they learned from it and they replicated it and, on all the other projects. And watch this space. You're going to see Senegal bringing out more and more public and actually implementing more and more PPP projects. So just basically to end off, there's a few major challenges that exist in Africa for all contractors like ourselves. And one is that we must realize that Africa is different than other continents. Most of the African countries are not first world countries. So first world principles doesn't always work. For instance, one of the problems that we have is things like bank guarantees. Previously, you supplied an insurance bond for things like advance payments. Now, you got to supply things like bank guarantees. Basically, if you want an advance payment for a project, you got to go to the bank. You got to put, if you want $10 million US dollars advance payment, you got to go and put $10 million US dollars in the bank, and they'll give you 10 million back. It doesn't make sense. You're killing the whole construction industry. In South Africa, in the whole of Africa, governments don't pay on time. Our cash flows are extremely constrained. And if that is expected of the construction industry, all you're doing is you're cancelling the construction industry all over Africa. And then we discussed this as well, in flexible regulations. We need to get the PPP's regulations in place. We need to work with the governments as the private sector to get these in place. I wish to thank you for the time that you've allowed me to show you a few things of how we think we can build the infrastructure of the future that Africa requires. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the day.